absolutely wild as Verne Gagne's all-star wrestling goes coast to coast and continent to continent. The greatest wrestlers in the world.
He may be an apprentice carpenter, but I guarantee you he is a seasoned ring veteran.
I've been hit with bar stools, bar rags, barmaids.
I'm talking to you.
They're scared that Hulkamania's still running wild. Oh, yeah. I got a big fat wife and 9 kids at home, and I gotta feed them.
And take a look at Jesse the Body in real life.
Open your hand once, if you would.
You want to see it?
This is absolutely unbelievable. Totally, completely out of control.
He's coming in over the top. Hey! Look out!
If there are words that describe what goes on before we actually hit the airwaves, it is wild and out of control. Because, you know, what is the old SNL skit? Two wild and crazy guys. Is that who I've got here with Nick Karch and Polish Joe? And I'm going to try and bring you guys in. Are you guys not there? Hold on. There you are.
Whoa, we had a little we went through a wormhole there.
We you know, and of course it didn't affect me because I don't do shit.
I love it.
I love it.
I love it. This is the best part of this show, is just the inorganic nonsense that happens. Because I tried to bring you guys in, and you guys would not. I didn't think you guys wanted to do the show. I figured maybe it was just going to be me, and we've been looking forward to this show maybe since the inception of the podcast. And I'm like, oh, you guys don't want to do the show. I'm going to do it by myself, which is fine because you were backstage and apparently you didn't want to join the main studio. So that's cool by me.
Wouldn't be the first time that Chupik and I had a door slammed in our face, and probably won't be the last.
Very true.
We got a good one today.
We do. And we say that we're preeminent, and this might be the most preeminentest of all of the shows that we've done. I didn't go to the University of Minnesota, so my grammar's a little off there. Went to North Dakota State. Here's the thing, to be honest here, guys. When I came up with the concept of this podcast, I was kind of kicking it around a few years ago. And being a fan of wrestling in Minnesota, my first memories were of the AWA. And I'm like, why is nobody talking about the AWA? Because there's so much here that I feel like fans want to know about. So when I approached you, Mick, about it, and then we brought Joe in, there's been one show in particular that people have been clamoring for. And if it wasn't for the individual that we've got on today, I don't think my level of wrestling would be what it is. Because before I hand it off to you guys, let me say this. When you're talking about the royal families of wrestling, I'm sorry, but if you are not mentioning the Gagnes, your opinion has no weight. Because you cannot talk about the history and the legacy of this business, of this industry, without mentioning the Gagnes. Because without Verne Gagne and the AWA, the wrestling business as we know it, and all of the big-time influential names, they aren't who they are if it isn't for Verne Gagne and the AWA.
No question about it. And, it's a legacy that will live forever if we have anything to say about it. We've said so many times, in the scheme of things with all the wrestling promotions and everything today and cable television and blah, 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 premium live events, the AWA was the real deal. And for those of us who grew up with the AWA, this is a terrific show. And you let me know when to bring on our guest, Chris.
Oh, you can do it whenever if you stop talking and hand it over to Joe, or you want to do it. He's sitting there waiting.
Well, let's do it.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Without further ado, let's bring in Greg Gagne.
There he is.
There he is.
There he is.
Whoa, sorry, I fell asleep during that big intro.
Starting already.
So did everybody else. Don't worry.
That's all right. We got a couple of viewers still left, Greg. We'll keep
Yeah.
entertained.
Well, that was a fantastic intro, Chris. Excellent job. And, I do a podcast with Magnum TA called The Straight Talk with the Boss, Magnum TA and Greg Gagne. And, everybody, they talk about the Crockett organization. They talk about McMahon. Very similarly, they talk about Eddie Graham and Don Owens and, the people that really built this industry. And I really get a little bummed out once in a while because we started a company with Steve Rosenthal called Powertown Wrestling, Powertown where wrestling lives on. And we do action figures. And my job was to get talent. Signed over 255 talents all the way back. I had to back to the families, go back into the 50s and, with Yukon Eric and Killer Kowalski and Verne and Bruce and that whole lineup of people that really built the industry from the DuPont network out of Chicago. And they don't give the AWA the credit it deserves. We were the biggest territory in all wrestling. Verne had expanded our TV market from all across Canada on it was not ESPN, but through ESPN. And from there, if you take it down from Winnipeg to St. Louis to the West Coast, and we always had, we didn't have a lot of talent. We probably had maybe 18, but they were all main eventers.
Absolutely.
And they loved working here because we only wrestled maybe 250 times out of the year where, Magnum TA, they were 365 days and sometimes twice on Saturday and Sunday. Never had a day off. The talent liked it here because they had time off and they made excellent money. Excellent money.
Greg, you talked about all across Canada. What was it?
TSN.
Yeah.
TSN. Yeah.
Yep. And then obviously later on with ESPN, and of course, who can forget All Star Wrestling and syndication? I mean, the AWA was international. I remember doing dubs and having to ship tapes all over the place and over the Middle East and in Europe. It was the AWA. I mean, it was king. It really was.
It was until, Vince McMahon got this notion that he was going to take over the wrestling world.
Yeah.
In fact, he came and met with us. And he came in and he spent a couple hours with us and we drove him back to the airport. And his idea was, he said, I want to purchase the AWA. And Verne said, well, I have partners, I've got partners in Denver, Gene Reed, and I got Dennis Hilgard in Milwaukee and Chicago. And I've got Bruiser and who's his partner? Verne and Dick the Bruiser were partners in Chicago and a few others. And then we had a deal with St. Louis. They wanted to put our TV on and we had a deal with Sam Muchnick down there. So, it was, and we have partners in Canada. So he said to Vince, Vince, I have to get with my partners, because they're partners. I can't just sell it to you. And Vince said, okay. So we drove him to the airport and he gets out of the car and he walks up to get in the door and he turns around and he yells at us, I don't negotiate. And Verne looked at me and said, what did he say? He said, he doesn't negotiate. He said, what does he mean by that? And I said, I don't know what he means by that. I guess he doesn't negotiate, whatever. Never heard from him again. And then he just started, going in and buying everything up. Stealing all the talent.
Well,
looking back on it, it was a very frustrating time for us. And it really put my dad in a bad position. And then, the memory started going, the Alzheimer's, all that set in. And I think that had a lot to do with what was going on with McMahon.
Well, we have the.
Now that I got the downer there for everybody, what should we talk about?
Well, we've got. Well, let's get into the questions because we've got so many. We threw out to all of our listeners, asked them to submit some questions, and
All
so
right.
this show is not only about Greg Gagne, but this is about our fans, which I would like to think most of our shows are. But let's get started. The very first question is from Donnie Graining. Which wrestlers hurt the AWA the most when they went to the other territories in the 1980s? Also, was there any thought to having the America's Championship held by Slaughter given more prominence and title defenses?
Well, first and foremost, without Hulk Hogan, McMahon would have never made it.
Right.
So that's what hurt the most. And, then Hogan started recruiting for McMahon other pieces of talent in the AWA. And the frustrating thing was, and I told a couple, especially my partner, Brunzell, Verne started him. Jim and I went to college together. And he left me hanging high and dry in Winnipeg when we had to wrestle the Road Warriors. Wow. And I said, Jim, Jesus. And I said to everybody, we won't hold you back from going. But finish out your commitments before you go. It hurt more by Hogan first not showing up. We had a big match in, I believe it was San Francisco. And we had worked hard on San Francisco to develop it. Roy Shire had it before that, kind of ran it in the ground. And we had the place sold out, and Hogan doesn't show up. And then he didn't show up in Chicago, didn't show up in Winnipeg, and it just went on and on. And then when we get that going, Brunzell walked out when we were wrestling the Road Warriors in Winnipeg. They throw Steve Olszewski in there. Steve was a good hand, but that isn't what the people wanted to see. Right. They wanted to see the Road Warriors and the High Flyers. So he hit the AWA the hardest because he knew if he could conquer the AWA, everything else would fall in place. We had the biggest territory in all of professional wrestling, and we had the greatest talent, and our talent only wrestled maybe 250 times out of the year. Other guys were 365 plus twice on Saturday and Sunday, never had a day off.
Greg,
Yep.
you brought up about how Hogan and others sort of left you hanging. I got to sort of give kudos, if you will, to Bobby Heenan. Bobby, from what he put in his books and from all reports, were that Bobby fulfilled all of his dates and lived up to his commitments. Is that fact?
That's fact. He was the only one, that fulfilled his commitments. And, Verne said, hey, that's fine, Bobby. You need to go, you go. And, of all the guys you would think wouldn't do it, Bobby Heenan, but he was loyal to the AWA. He worked for Bruiser for quite a bit. Sure. He made it down in that area, in the Chicago area. But once he hit the AWA, he became a national figure. Oh. And, he was without a doubt the best wrestling manager in all of professional wrestling.
And still is.
That.
Greg, I got a question. I got a question about Hogan.
Yeah.
Because people go back and forth on this to the point where we're just sick to death of it here. And it's always, if Verne would have put the strap on Hogan, he wouldn't have left, and blah, blah, blah. And the AWA would still. I'm of the opinion that with the money that Vince was dangling in front of Hogan, he would have left anyway. You put the strap on him and he would have disappeared. What's your take?
I think he would have gone. What Hulk didn't know is we were setting up for April was always, kind of the end of our season.
Yep.
And we always saved our biggest card for that. And Verne had cut a deal with, CBS and Jim Gentile, they had wanted to do a special on CBS in April with Hogan versus Bockwinkel for the title. So coming up, and they did this just before our Thanksgiving matches. So Verne agreed to it, and we had a match coming up with Hogan and Nick, and Hogan did not get the title then, and they had asked us to sign a non-disclosure. They didn't want anybody to know this was coming up, so we couldn't tell anybody, couldn't tell Hogan what was going on. And looking back, maybe we should have just pulled him aside and told him. But that would have CBS. Then, if that went really well, they were going to give us a once-a-month shot on Saturday nights on CBS.
Oh.
Wow.
So that's why, we had to hold everything off. And, the rest is history.
Well, the other part of Donnie's question was regarding the America's Championship by Slaughter and giving it more prominence and title defenses. Any?
Nah, I don't have any thoughts on that one. Sarge came in at a time where, we had lost a lot of our talent.
Sure.
And he didn't create the excitement in the AWA market that other wrestlers had done. And, I don't know if we'd have pushed it hard, maybe it would have done something, but, we were getting devastated by McMahon. And, every time we went to, Denver, Chicago, Milwaukee, somebody didn't show up, and it was usually the main event guys. And so the people were losing, their excitement for the AWA. And, Slaughter came in and didn't really move the needle like, some others had in the past. And it wasn't his fault. It was just where we were with the AWA at the time and, what was happening. So I don't know if that would have done anything for us or not. Tell you the truth, I don't think so.
I'd agree with that.
Yeah.
Mick, you got a question for Greg?
Greg had mentioned Hogan all of a sudden no-showing these dates. And then you kind of, a minute ago, you talked about the guys where all of a sudden another guy wouldn't show up and another guy wouldn't show up. What happened to the integrity, to the, you want to call it the good old boys network, to your handshake is your bond? What in the hell happened there? I mean, I understand the money. I get that. But no loyalty whatsoever.
Well, there was some. I mean, there were some guys that didn't leave. Nick Bockwinkel didn't. Ray Stevens, Wahoo McDaniels. I mean, guys like that, the veterans. It was the younger guys. McMahon had fed them this thing that they're going to go worldwide. And this is going to be the biggest thing that ever hit wrestling. And you have to give them credit. They've built that up to that. And, it's the only show in town to me right now. And they've done a phenomenal job with it. I give them all the credit in the world. Now, back then it was hard because, he didn't hit the Crockett organization.
Right.
And they were supposed to be, they're on fire. They got all this great talent. He hit the AWA because we had the biggest network. We had the best talent. And, that's who he had to go after to get that first, and then everything else would fall in place after that. So, I guess as a businessman, he was smart in the way he did it. Not that it was ethical or anything like that, according to the way wrestling was run all those years, and the loyalty of handshake was your word.
Right.
And the younger generation coming in at that time, all they wanted was money and exposure. And if they're going to get national exposure, which they were already getting on the AWA.
Sure.
That's why he went after them. The dipshits, they didn't figure that one out. And Hogan wanted to be champion. And, he probably would have been if he waited for that big national show. And if we had waited till then, who knows where wrestling would be today, where we'd be. It would have changed the whole landscape if you'd hung in there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Joe, you got another question in there from viewers?
Yeah, let's move on to the next question from David Solinsky. If you had to do it over again, was there anything you would have done differently as your behind the scenes position changed and grew over the years? Was Verne open to ideas regarding storylines, title reigns, etc.?
Oh yeah, he was the best at that. I mean, he you know, when we did what we called the booking for the matches, we had the talent in there. You know, the guys that Verne really respected, you know, Bachwinkle, Ray Stevens, you know, later on Wahoo McDaniels, and anybody else. Bobby Heenan was in there. He used the guys that had the great minds, and we'd bounce things around, and that's how we created what we did. You know, and it was he'd take everybody's idea, and then he would mold it together, and you know, maybe we should do it this way. And somebody say, well, how about this way? And you know, he was easy to work with, really. Good. And you know, when you had that kind of talent surrounding you, you wanted to bounce things off them and get their ideas. Yeah. And that's why it works so well.
You know, Greg, I'm thinking of you mentioned championships and titles. Back when I was growing up, and this was kind of the legacy and the history of the AWA, the championship meant something. And, you know, Verne held the title for a long time. So did Nick. I mean, and if a championship changed hands, either singles or tag team, even once a year, it was a big deal. And the champion meant something. And to me, nowadays, with 15, 20 championships in every promotion that's on television, everything is watered down. You know, what's your take on that?
Well, that was Verne focused on first the world champion. And, you know, he wouldn't always defend the title. So then, you know, he used the tag teams title to supplement that. So, you know, we might go to Denver, and the championship match that night is a tag team match, Pat Patterson and Ray Stevens against the High Flyers. And Nick would be not defending the title in Denver on that time, but he may be coming back on the next Denver card against a Billy Robinson who just beat Mad Dog Vachon for the winner to get a shot at the title. It was an underneath match on that championship card in Denver. And it did that all the way around. So you didn't burn the champion out and have him on there every once a month. We were in every city that we were at. Right. You know, it would take away from him. I mean, that was Verne's theory on it. So that when the world championship came in, it really meant something.
Well, to me, it's a case of less is more. You know, the whole approach that I remember from watching it growing up was you give enough to, you know, make sure they're not starving, but you still left them hungry to want more. And doing it the way that you laid it out was exactly what, you know.
And then you had a feud with the Crusher and Mad Dog Vachon. So why put the champions on a match like that, or even the tag team champions? You know, that carried the card.
Yeah.
You know, those feuds. And it was funny is what they used to call an angle, you know. Yeah. And we'd only do 2 or 3 a year.
Absolutely.
You know, and that carried it between the champions and that particular feud. If it was Mad Dog and Crusher, that would carry a main event anywhere. So then you didn't have to have the world champion on it. And then, you know, Verne might send Nick, if he's the champion, he might go to Japan for 2 weeks or a month and defend the title over there. So, you know, and you had all these great feuds that went on.
Why do you feel that doesn't work in today's wrestling now, Greg? Because it seems like everything, it's either short term or they can't sustain these 9 month to a year long ideas that I feel they can get the fans involved, invested.
Well, the WWE's done a pretty damn good job. You know, they got so much stuff going. To Vince McMahon, the difference between him and Verne Gagne, Verne was all about wrestling and legitimizing the sport. Vince, to him, it was the circus coming to town.
Yes. Oh, perfect.
You know, and they have done a phenomenal job with it, bringing it to the level that it's at now. I mean, you got to give him credit. When they first started, nobody in wrestling liked what he was doing. But now, since Triple H took over and the staff they have underneath, I think they've brought it back to more, a little more competition in the matches than it was prior to it. Before that, I mean, it was just, you know, he built the personalities, built all these personalities. You know, and I remember way back, Pat Patterson, when he was in the AWA, he'd always talk. He said, you know, wrestling is going to change. And I said, well, what do you mean? He says, well, here's how I envision it. I envision it as Hollywood, where you bring in all this talent and you feature the talent, you give them costumes, you lay out the matches for them, and you go from there. And I said, well, Pat, Jesus, I can't see that. And I know that when Pat went to New York, he sold that concept to Vince. I mean, now, you go backstage at the WWE, I mean, they have people that make costumes for everybody.
Unreal.
You know, I mean, it's like a Hollywood production. And that's the way Pat saw it. And that's the way Vince saw it. It's not wrestling. It's wrestling. It's just on the marquee, but it's Hollywood.
Sure is.
You know? And I mean, they write everybody's interview.
Yeah, that's,
you know.
Greg, I was gonna say that was the very next point I was gonna make, was about the promos. Back in the day, you know, we've talked about this many times on the show. Crusher, you got, you know, you're in Moline against such and such, go out and give us 5 minutes. Nowadays, every single word is scripted, and if a guy misses a line and forgets something, you see it. You see it right there that he's lost.
Yeah.
Well, you can tell in their delivery too when somebody is not
sincere.
Well, seasoned.
You don't feel it.
Exactly. They're because all of their time is spent trying to remember what they want to say rather than delivering it the way that they would.
Verne used to say, just approach it like it's an athletic contest, like you're going out on the field and you're okay, it's the Minnesota Vikings against the Chicago Bears. Talk to me about the Bears.
There you go.
Show me their strengths and their weaknesses.
Yeah.
But tell the story to the people. And it's got to come from the heart. If it doesn't, and it's not really you, you're gonna fall on your ass.
Greg, I've mentioned on this show a couple of times. I was at a TNA taping down in Orlando, probably 10 years ago. Big kid, Matt Morgan, about 6'10", and he had some talent. And I looked at him, and he had cue cards in his hand because he was going to be cutting a 2-minute promo in the ring. He's looking at these fucking cue cards for 45 minutes. I got it right.
Yeah.
And for a 2-minute promo, it was just, give me a break.
Well, then they can't deliver it because it's not really them.
That's right.
And Verne used to say, you're not going to be successful in this sport until you let your real personality come out.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's why I think you see interviews from, you know, Crusher and Mad Dog, and you feel like it's them because they're able to show that personality. And it seems natural that they can just go out and just be this individual. And I feel like that's kind of missing from today's.
Well, they talked about it like how they felt about their opponent. Mad Dog and Crusher, they didn't like each other. They and you know, and their interviews, you could tell. You know, and Bobby Heenan was the master of it.
Oh, was he?
You know, he would pick out your little idiosyncrasies that you had. And he said one time, he said, Jesus, you know, I was down in Florida. I was down watching because I understood Greg Gagne was training for this match with Nick Bockwinkel. And I look out and he's not moving. With his skinny legs, he was stuck right in the sand.
Oh,
You know,
He was so damn good.
oh, but I mean, you know, guys picked up on your little idiosyncrasies.
sure they did.
And they talked about them. And you had to believe in your mind when you were doing an interview that when you're going to go in and face your opponent, you better tell us how you really feel about it.
Right.
You know, and that's where Verne was so good at bringing out that in the individuals.
Greg, that's actually a perfect segue into our next question. It's from Randall Albertini from Ottawa, Canada.
Hey, Albert.
And
Randall.
Randall, yep. The question is, was there ever a real concern that you had that you had a target on your back when you first broke in as a wrestler, that they might try to take liberties with you because you were the owner's son?
Oh, yeah. But you know what? The way we were trained by Verne, you know, we did 6 months, was it? We did from September to March 1st, 6 hours a day, 6 days a week. And we learned everything you could possibly learn about professional wrestling and more. Billy Robinson spent the last hour with us showing us, him and Verne both, what they call, you know, the shoot holds.
Yeah.
You know, the submission holds. And the day we finished, Verne looked at all of us and he said, guys, you don't have to be afraid of anyone when you step in the ring.
Wonderful.
With what you know, you can handle yourself with anybody. And, you know, it never really set in to us till we went down. They sent Jim and I down to Atlanta. And we were supposed to wrestle Bob Wharton Jr. and Dick Slater for the tag team title that they had down in there. So the first night we get in, they had a match with Rip Hawk and big Dr. Jerry Graham. And they were both there at the end of their career, you know. And they, you know, we're supposed to go out there. We're in Columbus, Georgia. The place is sold out. We're on the second match with these guys. And we went about 25 minutes with them and tore the place down. And the booker got so mad at us. He said, what are you guys doing? So we're having a match. I mean, well, how are my guys going to follow us? Well, that's their freaking problem. Right? So then the booker ended up, because nobody could follow the match, the booker ended up booking us against Bob Backlund and Jerry Briscoe in tag team matches, clean matches for the next 2 weeks.
Huh.
But on night 2, and here's the point I was going to make. Night 2, we walk in the locker room, Brute Bernard and Gary Hart was his manager. And we went over and sat down and introduced ourselves. And excuse the language here, but Brute Bernard said, your dad's a cocksucker. And I said, well, I'm sure he feels the same way about you. And he looked at me and I said, do we have a problem? And him and Hart got up and went into another dressing room. So I said, Jim, come on, I'm going in the other direction. No, we're going to end up in a fight. Don't do it. I said, come on. So we walked in there and I sat down next to him and I said, Brute, do you and me have a problem? Because what you said about my dad, I'm ready to go if you are. And he said, no. And he shook my hand, said, I respect you, and walked away. But right then, it made us all of a sudden realize, from coming from Verne's camp, people were really afraid of us because they knew we could handle ourselves. And it happened a couple times in the ring, when we were down in Atlanta. Another team, the guy tried to try something in the ring, and we just reversed it and cranked it up and said, "Yeah, you want to keep going?" So the word gets out, and anybody that came out of Verne's camp people were really respected. And he turned out 144 wrestlers over the years. Vince McMahon wasn't turning out anybody. We were Verne was feeding the talent all around the country. Gene Oldie, Lars Anderson, Blackjack Lanza, Blackjack Mulligan, Ricky Steamboat, Ric Flair.
Unreal.
The list goes on and on of the people that he trained that, I would say 98% of them became main eventers.
Wow.
Got a question. Well, look there. Look at these two youngsters there.
Yep.
That guy in the mustache there on the left looks very familiar.
Yeah. Burt Reynolds.
That's right. And that 300-pounder on the other side of the ring. You talked, Greg, about the guys that came out of Verne's training camp, and I don't think there is any argument. If you look at professional wrestling in the 70s and the 80s and beyond, the talent roster, the guys that Verne trained, it literally is a who's who of wrestling. Nobody even comes close to the talent. Champions everywhere.
Everywhere. Baron von Raschke was another one that was trained by Verne. Verne sent, when we after we finished our camp, he sent Jim down to Kansas City, and he teamed up with Mike George down there and learned well. Ric Flair, he sent him to Charlotte. Steamboat went to Charlotte, and they're supposed to be down there for, a year or two, and then they'll come back to AWA. Well, once they got a hold of Flair down there, they never let him go. Right. Jim came back from Kansas City. Verne would send everybody out to his friends. Eddie Graham, he sent his talent down to Florida. And Eddie was another one that was a phenomenal trainer. And Verne and Eddie traded talent quite a bit, along with Don Owens out in Portland, Oregon. Yeah. And he'd send people up to Stu Hart. So people would go for a year or two and get their feet wet and learn the business. And then when they were ready, he'd bring them back to the AWA.
Gotcha.
That was his feeding system, his feeder system.
Greatest ever, no question about it.
Yeah.
Interesting question we got here, Greg, from Scott Heddle. A couple of questions. First of all, he wants to know, is there anybody that you personally enjoyed working with more than anybody else, where you felt the chemistry between the two of you was just couldn't be beat?
I was very fortunate because I guess it was my training, but I can't remember ever having a really bad match with anybody.
Good.
And that's not blowing my horn, it's blowing the training I had. That's why. But I remember a match that Jim and I had in Denver, Colorado. And I went to school out in Wyoming. So Denver was like almost home field for me. And we're wrestling Pat Patterson, Ray Stevens, tag team title match, Bobby Heenan in their corner. And in 8 minutes, Stevens and Patterson, all they had on us was a top wrist lock. And we tried to fight out of it. And as we're coming out, maybe Heenan would jump on the apron, the referee would turn, they'd pull us down by the hair or pull us down by our tights. 8 minutes. There was never a punch or a kick thrown in the match, and we had a full-fledged riot. People trying to get in the ring to help Jim and I get out of this top wrist lock that they had us in. 8
You know,
minutes. I mean, that's when you know you've really learned your profession.
What a difference from what you see today, because
God.
now, you don't even see a top wrist lock today.
No.
If you see a headlock, it may be for 7 secones,
Yeah.
and then a guy's throwing into the ropes.
Well, here's the reason why, Mick. TV is always doing all their studies. You know what the attention span right now of the American public is on TV before they switch the channel? 8 seconds. So
Wow.
if you want to keep the people involved in your program, especially with the wrestling, they got to keep it going.
Well, some of the
And
wrestling,
so TV has kind of dictated really the style of matches.
but some of the, I shouldn't say some, most of the matches, I don't even see an 8-second hold.
No.
To even try
No,
that.
they
It's
can't.
high spot after high spot after high spot.
That's all they do.
Yeah.
It's entertainment. Keep the people entertained.
Yeah.
This is showbiz. It's not wrestling anymore.
Nick used to refer to it as crash TV, and he made the point that you made. If people aren't entertained for more than a handful of seconds,
Yeah.
and if you're in the arena, boring, for God's sakes,
You know what? Whenever they said boring, we stayed in the hold longer. We did.
Another thing that
I forget where the hell we were. And I think it was Nick and I were wrestling. And it went for they started the boring stuff. And we just sat there, kept selling the hold. And we went for about 20 minutes like that until the people were standing. But today, if they say boring, they get up, oh, God, we got to do something. No, you make them believe.
Yeah.
I think
And when you make them believe, they don't say boring anymore.
Here's the question there, though, Greg, and it's so sad because, I had Tom Rocky Stone on our show last year. He was talking about matches between Nick and Billy Robinson.
Uh-huh.
And Tom said, the guys would come out of the locker room and they'd see Nick and Billy working, and they'd go, my God, are these guys shooting on each other? Because it looked that good. I mean, it was so snug and so good. And nowadays, everything is so freaking choreographed, move for move for move. And if one guy misses a spot, then you get the audience, the participation. You fucked up. I mean, they're chanting.
I can feel it in your heart. I can feel it in your heart. Yeah. And that's the way I am about it too. But I finally had to realize this is not wrestling anymore. It's a TV production. It's a Hollywood production. And they're building to their big pay-per-views. Their movie premiere.
Yeah.
Oh, you have to look at it that way. If you look at it that way, as people that grew up in it and loved it the way it was, it's not that way anymore. And it never will be.
It's heartbreaking. I mean, it really is.
It is. But you know what? They got so many million people watching their TV now, and they're all over the world, and they're selling out wherever they go. Why would they change?
Right.
There's no reason to change. I mean, they have created a television production TV show that you can take worldwide, and all these personalities that they build, they just bring them to town. The circus is coming to town.
Circus is coming to town.
Wow. And you know what? And we have to accept that that's the way it is today. And to go back to the way we were brought up in it, it would be very, very tough to keep that product on TV.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Everything has changed that way. And, I don't mean to, wear my heart on my sleeve about this.
I do too all the time, Mick. I mean, it's tough for what we grew up and what we know. Yeah.
You know, give me those 2 out of 3 fall matches on television with Kenny J and George Gadaski, you know, and guys like this. I
And
don't
they
need
were
to
battling. Those two got so pissed off all the time. They both wanted that damn trophy. We used to always go out and watch the match because we knew they were going to go after each other, and they did. It was classic stuff.
You know, to your point, Greg, when Vince first came into the AWA territory, and particularly in the Twin Cities, I was just like livid, you know. And I mean, I knew what was going on, but I hated it. I absolutely hated it. And it took a long time for me to accept just what you said. It's not wrestling anymore. He didn't even want to use the word wrestling.
No,
it's entertainment.
It's entertainment. And that's what when they hired me, when Vince hired me, and he only did it to make himself look good. He didn't give a shit about whether I was there or not. And I remember he'd have these big meetings before, and he'd go around and, you know, Michael Hayes and Dusty and, you know, the guys that were from wrestling that he had hired, he'd ask us what we thought. So he laid out this thing, and of course he went through about 9-10 people, and they all agree, oh yeah, that's the way to do it. And he got the Dusty, and Dusty, you know, Vince, I think we could, you know, it'd be better if we went this way. And then he got down and he said, okay, Greg, what do you think? I said, well, I agree with Dusty. You know, I just don't think you can, you know, go in there and do it that way. You're hurting the talent. You know, they were going to beat this guy. And he was one of their top guys, beat him. And then he wanted the guys to jump in the ring and beat him up some more and leave him carried out of the ring. And I said, you're killing the talent. And he said, well, we're doing it my way. It wasn't long after that where I got my little notice.
You know, well, whole different ball game.
Yeah, it really is. And you know what? Unless you can really buy into it, it's hard. It was really hard, difficult for me to work in that environment. You know, I miss wrestling. I'd love to be a part of it. I mean, AEW, I can't even watch them.
I know.
You know, and what they're paying their talent now. You know, Randy Orton just signed a 5-year contract for $10 million a year.
Unreal.
You know,
unreal.
And I'm looking here going into what did I put in my savings? I got to pull it up. You know, but it's a whole different ball game, you know. And yeah, I would love to be able to turn back the clock with all that phenomenal talent we had. You know, I mean, you look at the talent that came through there in the matches we had and how physical the matches were. I mean, shit, when that Bobby Duncan came off the ropes and hit you with the tackle, Jesus Christ, you thought you were going to end up in the balcony somewhere.
Greg, you know, you mentioned so many of the differences between then and now. And to me, one of the biggest differences, and this just irks the shit out of me, is, first of all, nobody's buying anything anymore. They know they're watching a TV show. You said earlier
they're watching that, and they're buying merchandise.
And they don't have any emotional connection to the talent whatsoever. And in a lot of cases, they hijack the show in these arenas with their chants and their signs. And it's just, again, it's maddening. And, you know, I come across on this podcast sometimes, you old fart, well, you're not going to go back to that. Right. You'll live with it. I get that. I don't have to like it.
No, you don't have to like it. You don't have to watch it, but you do.
Yeah, exactly. You know, it's Nick said, you know, it's a sickness. You know, wrestling fans, they get this sickness, and it can never be cured. It's just.
I'm going to tell you a funny story. First time I wrestled Mad Dog Vachon. I watched him wrestle my dad, and I see my dad come with scratches on his back and, you know, cut up. And I go, God almighty. I said to my dad, I said, Dad, what do I do with this guy? He goes, Greg, come here. I said, yeah. He says, hit him twice as hard as he hits you. And I said, and And he said, and good luck.
Oh, man.
I go out in the ring, and that Mad Dog hit me. You know, when he hit you, it was like getting hit with a cement block. You could feel it right down to your feet. Bam, and I exchanged a couple with him, and finally I really caught him with a good one. And I grabbed a leg, and I took him down. And I go to take a breath, and he goes, scratches down my back. I go, oh, my God. It was in Minneapolis. I wrestled him for about 23 minutes, got back in the locker room. I come in, Jim's sitting there. My back is scratched up. I'm bleeding. And he's laughing at me. And I said, funny, you got him Friday in Denver. Good luck. Right? So we get to Denver. And Jim comes to me and says, what do I do with him? And I said, well, I'll tell you what my dad told me to do. He said, what's that? And I said, hit him twice as hard as he hits you. Really? And I said, yeah, that's really good luck. So he goes out there. Mad Dog pushes him back in the turnbuckle, and he hits Jim, and then Jim hits him back. And about the third time, Jim hit him right on the chin. And Mad Dog grabbed him in the mouth with that finger, twirled him around, threw him out of the ring. Jim hit the floor, and he's laying there, and he sees a shadow. And Mad Dog jumps off the apron, both feet onto his stomach, knocks all the wind out of him, throws him back into the ring, grabs him by the mouth, throws him into the ring, picks him up, rolls him into the turnbuckle, and he goes, not that hard.
I love that. Oh,
Jim,
God,
Jim comes back, and he comes back after the match. He's scratched up. He's bleeding. And he goes, oh, my God. And I said, yeah, that's an experience, isn't it?
Greg, I'm going to shift gears here because we've had.
Oh, you didn't like that story?
I love the story. Obviously, you wishing Jim good luck did get him a hell of a lot of good there.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that was funnier than that.
I love that. We've talked many times on this podcast about you specifically, and all three of us are aware of some of the anti-Greg sentiments out there. And you and I talked about this at a local independent show not that long ago. For whatever reason, you automatically you were starting behind the starting line because you were the boss's son, your size, whatever it might be, the Gagne detractors. And we have said over and over again, nobody worked harder and was more credible than Greg Gagne. And the proof is in the pudding. When Nick Bockwinkel says, Greg Gagne was one of my favorite opponents because working with Greg was like having a night off. That says it all. And I just wanted to interject that because kudos to you. I don't think I ever saw you in a bad match. And that's legit. No matter who it was. Against Brody, when you and Jim wrestled Tito and Rick Martel, one of the greatest tag team matches I've ever seen.
Yeah, classic.
You always delivered, and you have three fans right here, man. I'll tell you.
Well, I appreciate that. You just brought up that match, and it was funny. I was in the Cauliflower Alley. The Waterloo, the Hall of Fame. I'm sorry. And Tito was inducted into that. And we did a little seminar about Power Town. And Tito wanted to talk. So we let him talk. And he was talking about Power Town, and then he was talking about me. And he said it was one of the greatest matches that I've ever been involved with Rick Martel and Greg and Jim. And he said, people don't give Greg the credit for the mind he had in the ring.
That's right. When
to do something, when not to do it. He said, we had the most unbelievable match, and Greg actually led us all the way through it.
Fantastic.
And that's really a compliment. But, and Verne told me, he says, you're going to have a tough time, pal. People are going to try to take advantage of you. You don't have to worry about that. We've trained you well enough. You know how to handle yourself. A lot of these guys are full of shit anyhow, so don't worry about it. But if you have a problem, just take care of it. And he said, and in the ring, just do what you do best. And listen, and when you have to lead. And, usually the heel would call the match. like when Nick and I worked, I called most of the match. That's why he called it a night off.
Wow.
But a lot of people let me lead it because the psychology and the believability, the credibility, people look at me, oh, that skinny little shit, he's going to get the shit kicked out of him. By the time it was over, he had turned him. And that's and it all came down to, credibility, making people believe, and having a lot of fire, and being able to make that comeback like nobody else can make one.
Oh my God.
And if you could, Verne said, if you can do all that, you can go anywhere, buddy.
You and Jim, when you were working together, and Jim would take a beating, and he'd be just missing the tag, and then the hot tag to Greg Gagne. When you came in the ring, the fire that you showed, and you had kind of the same entrance all the time, or you jumping up and down a little bit. You were all over, and it was so credible. I don't care how big you were, and I'm not stroking here. And I love this picture. That's Michael Hayes that you're wrestling there. Got him in the sleeper hold. But the fire of you and the believability, people would say, "Oh, come on, how can he hang with a Brody? How can he hang with a Jerry Blackwell? Whatever it might be." Well, damn it, you did it. And 15,000 people at the St. Paul Civic Center standing up and screaming your name and loving the comebacks is testimony to the fact that they believed in you. And you don't see that anymore today. You just don't.
No, it's that slow, methodical come back and explode. Mm-hmm. People feel your energy.
Yep.
And if you can show that energy in the, whether it's the way you move in the ring or, I just, I always approached it that it was a shoot.
Of course.
And if that really happened to you in a fight, how would you respond to it? That's what Verne used to say. And show that fire. Show that emotion. That's what the people feed off of. And
nobody did it better.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And, King Kong Brody came to Minneapolis, and he had a match with Sergeant Slaughter. He walked out of the ring, turned to Wally Carbo and Verne and said, "How do you like that one?" Then he had Jerry Blackwell, walked out of the ring, walked by him and said, "How do you like that one?" So Verne and Wally said, "What do you want?" "I want to work with Greg." And I said, "Well, I don't want to work with you." I said, "How are we going to make people believe that?" He said, "Don't worry." He says, "You have fire."
There you go.
And when people like that say they want to be in the ring with you, and you look at him and think, how in the shit are we going to make people believe this? Well, he was so good. And I had that fire that he needed to help really get him over.
Sure, of course.
And you work as a team. And Stan Hansen did the same thing. And I guess we earned their respect when Jim and I went to Japan, tag team tournament. And we got Jumbo Tsuruta and Tenaru, Giant Baba and Dory Funk Jr., who's the world NWA champion, Hansen and Brody, and Jim and myself. It's a 2-week tournament. And we wrestled in Salt Lake City the night before in a cage match. I got thrown over the top rope. My foot hit the top rope, and my knee just burnt like a son of a gun. Woke up in the morning, and it was swollen up like that. Got to get on a plane. We fly from Salt Lake to L.A., and I had the flight attendants give me ice. L.A. to Tokyo. got the ice on. Tokyo to Sapporo. 19 hours we're in the air. They pick us up in a cab. We have to get dressed in the cab. My knees all swollen up. We wrestled that night. I forget what team it wasn't one of the big teams. And we won the match in about 15, 16 minutes. The next night, we have Tenaru and Saruda in the first match of the tournament. We wrestle them for 53 minutes and win the match. The next night, we have Giant Bubba and Dory Funk Jr. 52 minutes.
Oh,
Now, my knee's killing me. And Bubba threw me off the ropes. You know, so I was 7 foot tall, and he gives me the big foot. I ran into him so hard I knocked him over. And Dory's going, "Oh God!" And everybody's oh. And after we won the match, and afterwards I went into Giant Bubba, and he's. I said, "I'm sorry." Oh, very good, very good.
That's tremendous.
So then the next night we got Hanson and Brody, and they're gods over there. So we get in the ring, and Jim's got his back to where they're coming out, and they come storming through the crowd. And I go, "Oh my God." I said, "Jim, look out." He gets hit with the cowbell. I get hit with the chain out of the ring, runs through the people, ran us into a wall out in the hall, hit us with a fire extinguisher, cut us up. We're fighting back to the ring, and Hanson can't see very good. And this Japanese guy gets up, right, and his folding chair fell down, and I grabbed it and I threw it like a frisbee, and I hit Hanson right above the nose. And his feet went up, his nose exploded, blood everywhere. We wrestled them for 30-some minutes.
Oh,
we were cut up, and all of a sudden, Jim is in with Brody, and Jim reached back and tagged me, and I came off the top rope with an elbow on Brody, and he went right to his knees. And all of a sudden, I see Jim get fired over the top rope, and I look up, and honest to God, Brody bear hugs me, locks my arms in, and he's on his knees. His head's here, and Hanson hits the ropes and comes flying across the ring with the lariat. Oh. That was the last thing I remember about that match.
Oh man!
So I don't know if we got a picture of that. I know I saw that the other night, and I'm telling you, and I know the exact moment that you're talking about. You got Brody's got you. You got nowhere to go, and that lariat is wrapped around your head like coiled steel.
It was unbelievable. But I mean, we were black and blue from hitting each other. I mean, it was that. Then we had to meet them in the finals, and they had won. But we had enough points now, so we're meeting them in the finals. And if we win this one, we get the deal. And we ended up winning the match.
Wow.
And that was, and they were heroes over there. So that was really a big deal. It was huge. But
that's fantastic.
that was quite an experience. And then Brody comes into Minneapolis, says he won't work with the other guys. He only wants to work with me. And I go, what?
And I wish everybody that takes shots at the size and how does he hang with Brody can hear this. I hope people hear this, that Frank asked to work with you.
Yeah.
I think that's testimony right there.
Well, I guess it is. I mean, I see Barb Goodish at all these events, and she said, Frank had so much respect for you. She said, because he said you weren't afraid of him. I said, well, Barb, let me tell you, I was afraid of him.
Rightfully so.
I fought for my life in there.
Greg, I got a follow-up question to our friend Scott Heddle, and this has been discussed among us here at the podcast and other people, and I don't know if you ever considered this or not. Was there ever discussion of Greg Gagne either turning on Jim Brunzell or, even worse, turning on his father, Verne, and turning heel and maybe aligning himself with a Bobby Heenan?
Well, that's what Brunzell always wanted to do.
He did.
Yeah. I couldn't do it with Verne. I mean, there's no way. They can't make that credible, for Christ's sake. You know, I hate that when they do a father-son angle like that. You know, it doesn't make any sense.
Right.
And I wouldn't do that. But Jim wanted me to turn on him, you know. And I think I could have been a really good heel. But, you know, Jim wanted to be the hero there in the AWA. And I said, why don't you turn on me? Well, I think you'd be better than me at it. And I said, well, I know I'd be better than you at it. I'm better than you right now. You know?
Yeah, I can't see Jim as a heel. It's just you're correct. You would have done an incredible job. And you once told me this, Greg, that it was always more difficult to be a baby face and to try to get somebody to like you than to be a heel.
That's right.
And so based on that, and this is not a shot at you, whatever, you would have been able to have done that so well. In hindsight, I would have loved to have seen it, just to have you turn heel, because it would have been so entertaining to watch, I think.
It might have been.
Let's see.
Yeah, I've thought back about it. Yeah, if you'd have put Bobby with me, but then, down the road, then Verne at some point would have had to get in with me. And I just, that wouldn't make to me any sense at all. If I was in a different territory, I don't know, maybe it wouldn't have meant as much, but I know I could have been a good heel. I'm a heel at heart. You probably both realize that too.
Nah.
I know Mick does.
No.
I've given Mitch so much shit over the years.
I love it. Don't quit.
So
Joe, we got a finale question here for part one.
We're gonna go. We got about 7-8 minutes left, and Greg, if you're okay, we'll after this one we'll wrap up this episode, and then we would love to do another one with you if you're
okay. You would? Shit. I'm going to get in a lot of trouble with my partners here. I'm not supposed to do any podcasts that we don't get paid for, because they don't want it taken away from the one Magnum and I are doing.
Well, understood.
And you are my friends. I'm not going to charge you a whole lot for the second hour, but it's going to be.
Boy.
I just wanted to be upfront with you and let you know what's going on.
Appreciate that.
Yes.
We'll play it by ear here, okay?
Okay. So the next or last question in this episode is from Brandon Dack.
Hey, Brandon.
As you look back on your career, is there one singles match and or tag team match that just stands out as your absolute favorite?
Well, I would say, we've already talked about it. I'd say the tag team match in Denver with Patterson and Stevens. You got to realize at that time, Patterson had left the AWA, and Jim and I were so established in Denver, they called it a cold match, cold title match. They threw us in there, and Pat came in just for that match in Denver. And we sold the joint out. And Pat had been gone for quite a while. And to have the emotion that was felt in the arena that night from the people, what we were doing in the ring, was so gratifying, because, like I said, never threw a punch or a kick, a top wrist lock, and we had a full-fledged riot.
Unreal.
I mean, when you can do that, you have, like Pat and Ray said afterwards, you've really excelled in the art of professional wrestling.
Telling that story,
Yep.
lost art.
But I had a lot of really good matches with a lot of different talent, and I could say matches I had with Nick, matches I had with Ray alone. God, with Bobby Heenan, you know, the weasel suit match. I don't know. I just was very fortunate to been able to learn the art of professional wrestling and then convey, because of my size, to the people that we were a legitimate wrestler.
It's
I
often.
don't know how any other way to put it. And you know, I see stuff today, and I think back, God, I should have maybe given it a shot and gone to the WWE. I know I could work as good as Bret Hart, the Shawn Michaels. Shit, I helped Shawn so much on the philosophy of wrestling when he was here. He was hard to work with. You know, he was young and full of piss and vinegar. But I'd take him in the locker room after the match and say, "Hey guys, hey, good match, but you know, if you'd gone here and here with it, it would have been better." And they had phenomenal matches with Buddy Rose and Doug Summers, the Midnight Rockers. But you know, yeah, I guess that's the one thing that really, if I had to second guess myself, which I have, is should I have gone there and given it a shot, or would Vince, because it was me, just bury me up there? I don't know.
Are you talking?
I sure would like to be, you know, I feel like I could have been put in that category that they put Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart and those other great workers up there, Triple H and those guys. You know, I'd like to.
No argument here.
I don't know if but that's if I have any doubt. I mean, that's one thing that bugs me a little bit when I see the notoriety that all these people and how great, this guy was this and he, oh God, they're so great. Shit, I'd like to have shown them what I had.
Well, we'll wrap up this episode. We've got more coming up with Greg Gagne. Greg, certainly thank you. And your podcast. Go ahead and let's plug your podcast again with TA.
It's called Straight Talk with the Boss, Magnum TA and Greg Gagne.
Yeah, and they're on the Four
Horsemen Network, YouTube. I mean, we're all over the place. I think we have a pretty good podcast. We, you know, TA is unbelievable. I mean, there's another guy whose career was cut short.
Yes. And
God, he's just a fantastic individual. Great partner to have.
Great to work with on Power Town and with you on Power Town. We'll wrap up this episode. We're going to come back with more with the legendary Greg Gagne.
Thank you, guys.